Hello and welcome to Lore Diver, the podcast about lore, world building, and alternative takes. This is episode 12 of Series 1, The Peoples of Chult and the Chultan Peninsula. I'm your guide, Graham, so let's dive in. Alright, so we're back into the world of reptiles today, coming in with a twofer episode covering both the Saurials and Tortles, both popular reptile races, one of which is new to the realms, and one of which is a little bit older, which is pretty cool. So yeah, both have a long history, and it hasn't really been leveraged that well over the years. So let's dive into this lore, and we're going to open up with Tortles. So, Tortles. Oh, man. The Tortles were a blast to research, mostly because as a player race that's not actually native to Forgotten Realms, Toril, or anything like that, I actually had to go digging through stuff from Mystara, of all places. That's right, Mystara. The basic D&D setting is where they first made their appearance. And it was a lot of fun. Got to go through some Red Steel stuff and really sort of get a grip on how their early representation was. And so moving into their history and the editions here, I'm just going to caveat it with, until 5th edition, absolutely nothing that I'm going to say has anything to do with Forgotten Realms. It is all information coming from their original appearance on the Savage Coast of Mystara, way back in Basic and then later in 2nd edition. So let's get into this. All right, so right off the hop, Basic, the Savage Coast module X9 for the expert set. This is where, as far as I can tell, Tortles first appeared, and they appear as non-hostile monsters. Like literally, they're not like almost all the encounters you see for them. They're super chill, and if you help them doing whatever they're doing, they help you with their adventure. If you attack them, they suck into their shells and don't want to have anything to do with you. And if you force their hands, they'll engage in combat. It was really cool. It's not a lot of non-hostile monsters usually involved in stuff, and it was nice to see. So that's their first appearance, and it's just monsters. They, as far as I can tell, they were not available as a player race yet when they were first introduced there. So that's where they come in. Now they get their first big kick at the can in 2nd edition, and what happened here was a very interesting set of circumstances, because one of the things that really separated, in my mind, the basic set, and when I'm talking about basic, I'm talking about Beckme, the basic expert, champion, master, and immortals series of basic books that were eventually condensed into the rules cyclopedia. And the reason for that is because that was the longest running and arguably best supported version of basic, and it's the version they appeared with. Now, they didn't in that game shy away nearly as badly from the idea of having non-standard player races available as characters, because with basic, your race was your class, unless you're a human, in which case it could be a rogue or a thief, cleric, fighter, or magic user. So yeah, basic they had orcs, they had all sorts of stuff, and it wasn't always well done. There's a lot of problems with it, but it was sort of like they were the vanguard of trying to make the game modern and keep it cool in a lot of ways like that. And at some point during TSR's reign over 2nd edition AD&D, someone decided that it would be awesome if they took the Red Steel concept, which I have no idea where that came from, and mated it to the Savage Coast of Mystara, and have that as a campaign setting for 2nd edition. And that's what they did. And they brought all the zany craziness of Basic's available player races into 2nd edition, and didn't even blink about it. It wasn't a case of maybe we should or maybe we shouldn't. They're like, no, this is it. This is what's in the game. And so, in addition to Tortles coming in to second edition and into the second edition world, there were lupins, which are an anthropomorphic canine race. There are racastas, which are sort of like a bigger, bulkier tabaxi that are really cool. There was the Arania, which were a shape-changing arachnid race, and all this stuff was brought in as available player races for players in the Red Steel campaign setting, which was fantastic. And after that, Turtles were expanded on and got even cooler because in addition to being a available player race, the creators went like full on with turtle tortoise hybrid operations. And so in addition to your turtles, they had I don't even know how to pronounce this properly. Kla'ata, I think it's how to pronounce it. Basically, it was like a large size marine turtle. So it's like a 12-foot long super turtle that would patrol their coastlines and was friendly to turtles and like help protect their coasts. And they even had amphibious turtle soft shell mounts called Nictus. And this was like their primary method of getting around when they weren't walking. And the Nictus were brutal. Like, it's not often you see notes like this in a monster description, but if you started a fight with a turtle who had one of these things, or if you ran into a wild one, on a natural 20, it would sever a hand or foot off of whatever it was attacking. So it was like, a little snapping turtle head would like shoot out and your character's minus a foot. Good luck. And it was great. And there was even hostile counterparts for the turtles. And these were snappers. And snappers were a marine version of the turtle. Like, they decided for whatever reason they didn't want to come onto land. And so they were out in the ocean and they were sort of hostile and would get into fights with other marine races. And they had evil guardian turtles called the Clo-Rin. And these evil turtles would like demand treasure from them, which kept them, of course, raiding people for treasure. And so, yeah, it was this whole cool, like, little turtle ecosystem thing they had going on in Red Steel. And they even gave them some, like, deeper history and background, which, again, rare for a monster folk race, or a beast folk race. And they were given a lost, or more accurately described as fallen, mega-civilization called Zool. And the worst part about this is Zool was part of Mystara and not part of Forgotten Realms, because it would have been awesome to have a turtle civilization on Toril somewhere for characters to explore, because I love that sort of stuff. And they got into their culture, which was best described as being super chill. The way their life cycle works makes them need to stick together a lot, which helps with the whole dying after reproducing thing, which was a thing in the second edition and third edition Tortles. And that was, they would mate and then die within a year of mating. And those who didn't mate could live dramatically longer, so it was sort of a Dr. Zoidberg thing from Futurama there. And I don't really think they thought it out too well, because I think that would lead to a very unstable society that would not be able to build a giant mega civilization called Zool. But that's just me. So from there, it goes on to 3.5 edition, and this is a whole lot of Dragon to the rescue. So Dragon Magazine would take looks at older campaign settings that weren't necessarily being fully supported or supported at all in 3rd and 3.5. And in issue number 315, they take a quick look at Red Steel and provides updates to the ability score modifiers and information about the Turtles. So Turtles, they managed to make it into 3.5, and it's pretty awesome. Then 4th edition happens, and like so many other things in 4th edition, they were left out of battle. They're just not on the scene at all. I chalk it up to 4th edition simply not existing long enough for them to port everything over, and so Tortles, were amongst the missed out groups in that one. Now 5th edition rolls up, and out of nowhere comes the Tortle package, and Tortles are introduced whole cloth right into the Forgotten Realms. People love them. There's a whole lot of people like myself who grew up with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and the idea of being able to play an anthropomorphic turtle in D&D is extremely attractive. And as part of a charity drive, Wizards released the Turtle package as an official update and upgrade to the Tomb of Annihilation. It's 28 pages long. It adds new NPCs. It gives a beautifully detailed map of the snout of Omgar, which is the home island of the Tortles at the southern end of Chult, and gives them a little bit of background. There's also like some adventure stuff there and a few places for characters to get into trouble and fight some weird monsters and all that sort of stuff. But we'll get into that. Don't want to spoil the whole thing for you. But yeah, Tortles in the realms. They arrive. There's been some upgrades to their lives. For example, they no longer, die at 50 right away. However, they do seek to reproduce towards the end of their lives. And so the same issue is sort of perpetuated. It's a weird flex. I'm not sure if it's really an improvement or not. And the final thing that you could miss if you were just skimming through the Turtle package was that they give the details for what deities in Greyhawk, Dragonlance, and Eberron that the Turtles would prefer to worship, effectively linking them to all these worlds where they had previously not existed. So it's very much a situation like what happened when everything was going on, and if there's any Doctor Who fans out there, when the War Doctor was happening and all that stuff, and it showed the War Doctor's origin, and they had the 8th Doctor there, who, in a single sentence, canonized all of his audio adventures because he had only been in a movie previously. That's what happened here with the Tortles. All of a sudden, Tortles go from being a Mystara-specific, Savage Coast-specific player race to being linked to Greyhawk, Dragonlance, and Eberron. All through listing something as simple as these are the deities on these worlds that they would want to worship. So there we go. Turtles everywhere. Now, as for their history in the campaign setting, Turtles have no history in the Forgotten Realms. They weren't part of the world until 5th edition. And in an odd move, no history is given for them in the Turtle package either, which leads me to the conclusion that they've arrived relatively recently to the world, probably during the Spell Plague era. And in the Forgotten Realms, this is a very well-established event. People coming from other worlds and basically colonizing the place or settling the place. Even some of the major gods, or well, not some, a lot of the major gods come from other worlds and other continuities. So that's what I got from that. Now, as for their current state in the campaign setting, Turtles are just chill. And that's what they're doing. They're chilling out. They're being Turtles on Turtle Island. They're largely unaffected by most of the events on the mainland. And they adventure for fun because it's something they want to do. They are an incredibly rare example in the World of Forgotten Realms of a stable community with stable everything going on in it, where people just say, hey, you know what? I think I'm going to go adventure. I'm going to grab my backpack. I got a spear. I've got a giant shell on my back. I'm going to go have some adventures. And I love it. It's cool. It is a fantastic thing to read about. Now, my take on how things could be done with the Turtles. Okay, well, they're a lot like the Grung in the sense that they're a completely new addition to the setting. They do have some background, which is awesome if you want to draw from their Red Steel, the Red Steel campaign setting, and from Mystara. But it means there's also a couple of directions you could take with them, depending on if you want them to be new arrivals or if you want them to be something native to the Forgotten Realms. And then after that, things sort of go more or less the same way in my imagination. But so background 1, recent arrivals. The Spell Plague was a hell of a trip, and introducing a lot of new peoples and things to the realms, most notably things like the Dragonborn and the Genazi Kingdom of Akinal, that sort of thing, and the conversion of a large part of the population of Kalimshan into Genazi. Lots of things changed during the Spell Plague. And so, you know what? You could just give the Turtles a very similar background. Pardon me. Maybe they're native to Abir and got sundered in and then left behind in a less than perfect second sundering. Or maybe they came from a different plane or dimension and, like so many other peoples, just stuck around. Either way, they've located a great spot because turtles love warm water, warm beaches, warm everything, and a little island on the south of Schult, that is exactly their bag, and it works great if you want to have them just be new arrivals, maybe only a couple of generations into living in the place. So they're still super curious, still moving out to adventure and everything else like that. Now, background number 2, if you want a more in-depth and deeper link to the Forgotten Realms themselves, have them be the Batrachi's last creation, or one of their final creations. Now, the Batrachi were the amphibian and Piscian, like fish creator race. And while reptiles are more or less the Syrinx thing in the Forgotten Realms, turtles are more or less amphibious, and it lends itself really well to something the Batrachi might have created. Especially, just before their giant war with their war with the giants, where they lost horribly and everything went sideways in like a heartbeat. And this opens up a great opportunity to port in the rest of the supporting tortoise creations from Red Steel and create that whole little ecosystem again, because the Batrachi would have created them as part of a whole collection of things. And now all of a sudden, they've got that deeper connection to the realms. They're a natural part of the world, and it's they're more established, and it will let you spread them wider and further, which is going into the next point, and that's I would make them common along the southern coasts. So turtles are noted for their preference for warm weather, warm water, and that makes them a shoe-in to be common to rare player races appearing in the Shining South and the southern parts of the Lands of Intrigue, like along the coastlines of the Shining Sea, the Trackless Sea, and the Great Sea. Yeah, this gives them an amazing amount of coverage, and in my opinion, even more importantly, it changes up the mix of player races in the region and really gives it more distinction from the standard races you see in the more conventionally depicted parts of the Forgotten Realms, like up in Waterdeep in the north and places like that. So, I would spread the turtles out along the peninsula. Then I would just head east. Halrua, Dambrath, all those places, and I would sort of have them start winding down and becoming rarer and rarer as you get closer towards the Outer East and stuff like that. Another thing that you might do is you may put them into Zakara. Their culture is very reminiscent of the more urbane and civilized one that is depicted in a lot of the Al-Qadim books, and they would fit in fantastically well in the Pirate Isles and on the western coast of Zakara, which is just off the map where we can't see on the regular maps of Faerun. So yeah, that's where I would put the turtles. Now, culturally, turtles like the Saurials, who I'll be covering next, they're peaceful people, and you know what? I would just leave that. It is so nice in a setting where everything's aggressive, everything's fighting, everything's just like clawing and plotting and everything else like that. It's just nice sometimes to read up about a player race where they're just like, yeah, you know what? I'm a giant turtle, and I'm just chilling out. That's what we are. I love that. I think it's great, and I would absolutely keep it. The only serious change I think I would introduce to the turtles is I would tinker with their lifespan and reproduction issue. I'm not sure why it was introduced in the first place, but when I was thinking about it more and more as I was writing this and preparing for this episode, I realized that having whole generations die off relatively rapidly would lead to a very unstable and chaotic culture, because their ability to pass on information wouldn't be very good. Their ability to pass on cultural practices and everything else would also be very limited, and you'd end up with a situation where every generation would be more or lless reinventing themselves based off what they can try to figure out from the generation that died having them, and from the few people who are maybe a little bit too young to have reproduced at the same time. So it's I would shift that around, and they need to remain viable at the same time, since apparently, and this was a lot through the Red Steel, they really emphasized how much things loved eating their eggs, which I felt was a little weird, but hey, it was Red Steel, and Red Steel was a weird operation. But yeah, they're extra delicacy, so there needs to be a whole bunch of balancing done. And so my approach is, I think what I would do is I would have it, they reproduce once every 25 years or so. They have a small clutch of eggs, and then when they hit 75, their urge to mate just ends. And then they live on to 250 or 500 years or something like that. Let them be a long-lived turtle or tortoise. I mean, that's one of the cool things about turtles and tortoises of the real world, is how long they live and how much stuff they see. And I want that for turtles. And so I think they'd also be amazing sages, with like that sort of lifespan and the sort of perspective they have. And the final thing, and I know I've already harped on it, but I'm going to harp on it again, and that is turtles need their turtle ecosystem. Like, I loved the fact that they had like soft-shelled riding amphibious turtle tortoise things, and they had guardian turtles out in the water, and there was like, you know, more malign version of them out there too, the snappers, who were you know, they couldn't retreat into their shells and were more bitey and vicious and stuff like that. I love all that stuff, and I wish it had been brought over too, because it helps feed into the fantasy vibe of Forgotten Realms. Because a lot of the time, fantasy gets lost in trying to be medieval Europe or medieval wherever, and it forgets that in fantasy you can do all sorts of crazy stuff. And having turtles riding these their Nikto mounts around, or like or getting into battle and biting off their enemies' hands and feet. I love it. I think it makes the world more fantastic and more fantastical in its perception, and I think that it would be a good idea to do. So that's Tortles, my perspective. Now, Saurials. Okay. Okay. Saurials are old hands in the Forgotten Realms. If you hadn't heard of them until recently, that is completely understandable, because of how they were introduced and how they were treated for so long. It was so easy to miss them, even though they were awesome. And they date all the way back to 1988, when the very first Saurial Dragonbait, appears in the Azure Bonds novel. And this is part of the larger Finder's Stone trilogy, which eventually brings the rest of the Saurials into the setting, with 4 main subspecies, ultimately calling Forgotten Realms home. And now this set these novels were followed rapidly by the Curse of the Azure Bonds box set, which is a whole campaign setting. And of course, you know, as I said, Dragonbait, he's introduced in these novels, and it comes back in Tomb of Annihilation. And even though at the beginning he was described as an oddly quiet lizard man, everything was explained, everything was developed. Pardon me. And like, to be honest, if you have a chance to read these novels, read them. The person writing them knew the game and also wanted to write fantasy, and they did a fantastic job balancing all of that. You know, like, you know, why, like, they explained why Dragonbait was Dragonbait. They managed to explain all the stuff going on around him in an age when the idea of having a non-human paladin was like verboten in the game. And also, like, they even managed to explain like why Alias's armor was, you know, this sort of cheesecake chainmail bikini thing, and it was like, yeah, it's super magical, and it actually was magical in the stories. You know, it wasn't just oh yeah, it's magical. The writer actually made sure that you knew that it was magical, and it wasn't just being done for visual effect, which, you know, was pretty forward thinking for 1988. So yeah, worth checking out. And this is where the Saurials all arrive, and they get immediately caught up in a whole bunch of craziness that I'll get into in their history. However, they're not in the setting. A lost band of them are actually an encounter in the jungles of Chult, where they're also given a homeland in that through all this. The Lost Vale, or Lost Dale as it's called later, which is a location sandwiched in the mountains between the Anarok Desert and Daggerdale. As an interesting and potentially RP hampering situation, they're incapable of conventional speech when they first appear in the novels and in the game, because their own language is pitched higher than most can hear. So like only like dogs, fae folk, and a few other people can actually hear what they're saying. And they communicate through a combination of verbalizations and scent generation. So, for example, things like the smell of baked bread indicated anger. And there's like a whole list in, I think it was Dungeon, or not Dungeon, I think it was Dragon Magazine. There's a whole list of the scents they can generate and what all those scents mean, so that players who are around them or people who decide to play them later on would be able to say, yeah, like, my character smells like this. And when they say that, they're effectively meant their character was shouting a scent out to try to let people know how they were feeling, which is pretty cool. However, in the jungles of Chult, the leader of the group there is capable of speaking some Batiri, and so I guess with an extreme amount of effort, they can manage to lower their voices enough to be audible to regular people in the world. Their culture is framed up, and it's all about teamwork and the group succeeding. Like, it was... There's no backstabbing. It's super chill. It's not total chill, but it's very chill, and it's just them trying to get along and trying to survive in a radically new world that they find themselves in. And while I was unable to find any official second edition player race information, the various types of Saurial, based on Hadrosaurs, Triceratops, Pterodactyls, and Stegosaurs, those being the finbacks, hornheads, flyers, and bladebacks, and some very creative naming there, all have monster stats, which is good. Now, 3rd edition, Dragon saves the day, and then they become official with a web enhancement to the Serpent Kingdoms book. So issue number 292 of Dragon Magazine comes in swinging with player race stats, alternative XP tables because of how powerful they were, because they're doing that whole level adjustment thing for more powerful characters. So they bring that in, and it's good. They like it. And they change the language that they speak to Draconic, but keep the fact that their voices are too high for most to hear. So a little bit of oddities there, language shift, all that sort of thing. Then the web enhancement comes out. You can still look at this web enhancement online as well. And this has like their canonical, like this is an official web enhancement information packet, use it sort of thing going on. And it says that after their battle with Moander and all that stuff, or Moander, not sure how to pronounce that. Anyways, there's only 110 of them left. However, as of 3rd edition, their numbers had more than tripled to 485, and they were gently expanding through the area that they claimed in Tortle, which I think is pretty awesome. And continues through all of this, Dragonbait is the only example NPC that they give, and I suspect that's because they simply upgraded him from edition to edition. Now, 4th edition, you may be expecting me to say that they weren't there. They were there. They were mentioned, I think 3 times in the campaign setting book for the Forgotten Realms. And they got the boots laid to them just like so many other places and peoples in that edition. It was not pleasant at all. And basically what happened was, in 1372, the Netherese come back, the Spell Plague happens, the Netherese reclaim the lands that were once theirs, including where the Saurials were, forcing them underground and forcing them to flee. So the Netherese show up, force out the peaceful Saurials, take over the Lost Dale, give it its old name, which was Tarkaldale. Definitely not an improvement there, name-wise. And that was 4th edition. That was it. Just like this one mention that, oh yeah, there were Saurials here. They were cool and peaceful, but it's 4th edition. Screw them. Kick them out. So, yeah. Now, 5th edition. Well, there's Dragonbait. That's really about it. So the only Saurial appearing in 5th edition is Dragonbait, who, for some reason that's completely unexplained, is now hanging out with Artist Kimber. The two have, to my knowledge, no prior history, and it was super weird for me, as someone who had read all these old books and was familiar with these characters, to suddenly find that Dragonbait was hanging out with Artist Kimber. And not only that, was he was basically Artist Kimber's sidekick. And also, like, they nerfed his sword pretty hard, because his old sword, Hillcleaver, was like a Holy Avenger with the ability to negate magic, which is pretty badass. And now it's just like a +3 Holy Avenger. Like, it's not even a full power Holy Avenger. That's weak. And then there's a little note saying that Saurials are said to be rare, that they have no known communities, which is really odd for a group that was super community oriented. Like, they're more community oriented than dwarves are. And yeah, for some reason, when they fled their land, they didn't reform anywhere else or do anything. And Dragonbait it's stated that he's a common traveler to Chult. So the wheels started to get spinning there a little bit for me as I was reading that. But that was it. That's all the information for them from 5th edition. Now, their history in the campaign setting is pretty sweet, on the other hand, because they got history. Now, this all goes back to the Gods' War, also known as the Time of Troubles. And what happened was a group of Saurials were captured by Moander, who was the god of decay, who was trying to make a comeback. And if you're not familiar with him, that's completely understandable as well, because Moander was, if I remember correctly, Moander was one of the Netherese gods. And I think he was their god of decay or death or something like that. And in these books, again, if I remember correctly, because it's been like 20-something years since I read them, he was trying to he'd been reduced down to a demi-power. He hadn't died completely, but he was no longer at a full-powered god and was trying to get his godhood back. And to do that, he reached into another dimension and captured a bunch of Saurials and kept them in a little pocket dimension where he like tried to warp and twist them, and then he brought them into the Lost Vale and was using them to despoil nature and everything else like that. It was really like, it's not often that an evil god actually does like legit evil things in these games. Like, usually it's just like, I'm evil, I love undead, or I'm evil, I'm the god of death or murder or something like that. No, Moander was like doing some legit evil stuff with these Saurials. And that was like the whole thrust of the Azerbaijan's books, was like eventually them freeing the Saurials and everything else. And so after the destruction of Moander, and the elevation of Finder to godhood as the nameless bard, there was about 110 of them left. And they were sitting around 500 when Netheril returned in 1372, and are driven out of their holdings during the Spell Plague. And that's sort of reading between the lines here. As of 1491 DR, Dragonbait is partnered with Artist Kimber to help him find his wife and where Mesra really is. And that dovetails perfectly into their current state of the campaign setting, which is the Saurials being missed, and like painfully so. Like, they're a great fit for Chult, and just having Dragonbait kicking around and like as a sidekick is just so weak sauce. It's not even funny. So now the fun part, like my take on how it could be done. Saurials are awesome. I love dinosaurs and dinosaur people in D&D, especially in a place like Chult, where like they recast the location to make it specifically into a pulp fiction based Lost World. Like, hell yeah, like that just makes sense. It's awesome. But it didn't happen. So let's talk about how to make that happen. So in 2nd edition, it was established there were some Saurials in Chult, and Chult is a great location for them. It's warm, the weather's good, and it's largely devoid of people, especially after given the events of 4th edition. And 4th edition actually gives them an awesome segue to go there. And the reasons are, as I just said, the place is largely devoid of humans, and was also free of most spell plague effects. Like, there weren't any like spell scarred areas that I can remember around Chult. And aside from like the undead and dinosaur threat, the place was pretty much set for anyone to move in. It's an island. Makes it difficult to get there. Also makes it a good place to take refuge. There are dinosaurs there they could domesticate and likely communicate with. This is probably something that they would be bringing with them from whatever dimension they came from originally. If it was a parallel, well, not if it was a parallel material plane, and if dinosaur people became the dominant and sort of anthropoidal race there, it makes sense to me that like us being the sort of the dominant mammals, they would have other dinosaur type and reptile type creatures around that they would domesticate. And so domesticating dinosaurs makes sense to me, and it's cool. And the place is relatively safe. There are a lot of threats. However, the Saurials are also very tough, and they generate a phenomenal number of powerful wizards, clerics, and paladins, which are exactly the sort of thing that a small group needs to keep them alive long enough for them to, actually get into reconstruction and rebuilding themselves. And given that they lay small clutches of eggs, their ability, and that they were able to triple their population from 110 over triple it to 485 in the space of, let's see here, 1357. So in 30 years they were able to triple their population. They are in, like, as long as enough of them survive to maintain a diverse gene pool, they're set. Now, stuff to do with them in Chult, I would make them allies to the Ashowe. I covered them way back in episode 1. They were one of the human tribes that were sort of clumped together under the Chultan umbrella. And the reason for this is Saurials are amazing magic users, especially their hornheads, the Triceratops subspecies. Placing them in or around the ruins of Ashowe holdings and linking them to the Ashowe would be cool. It would work extremely well. They have common interests. Both groups are trying to rebuild. Both groups have advantages they can lend to each other. And the Saurials also have a history of working with humans, Alias and other groups. So if they encounter people that are accepting of them, they are equally accepting of those people. And I think it would work out well. And it would give a nice balance to the possibly evil tendencies or Shar worshipping tendencies that may start cropping up amongst the Ashowe, if you run them like that. Make them heroes in Chult. I mean, they generate, like, as I said, they generate a lot of clerics and paladins. This would make them huge heroes to people in undead infested jungles, because clerics and paladins hate that nonsense, and people love heroes. Things I would change, I would give them better name for their subspecies. Finback, Bladeback, Hornhead, and Flyer are just, they're terrible. I'm sure that better names could be come up with, because these are weak at best and they're super lazy at worst. It'd be like describing elves as, yeah, it's a long-eared, pointy person. Dwarves are short, beard people that mine. I've never liked this tendency in D&D for them to fall back on like just rough descriptions instead of giving things names, and I would change that. I would let them adapt. The speech issue can be a really, really bad role-playing limitation, and they have it worse than the Kenku do. But if you allow them to understand more languages, and as seen in the second edition, be able to speak a few, even if in a limited form, that would put them at least on par with the Kenku, which would make them a far more playable race for your players to use. They'd also be far more useful as NPCs. I mean, after all, they've been on the planet for over 150 years at this point, and there's no reason to have them still, being too high-pitched to hear or anything. Like, throw them a bone. Let them communicate. Next thing I would do, and this is more towards the Tomb of Annihilation, like the campaign itself, I would break up Artemis Kimber and Dragonbait. Artemis Kimber was and is problematic in a number of white savior related ways as a character, and Dragonbait's background was so much cooler and way more interesting than you would suspect just reading about him as an NPC in the Tomb of Annihilation. I think that Dragonbait should be a hero in his own right, and like should be a legend in the jungles of Chult and in Port Nyanzaru. Like, he is an ancient paladin who protects his people and the humans of Chult from the undead and other threats. You know, there should be legends about him. He shouldn't be Artist Kimber's sidekick. And he should have, like, give him his sword. Give him Hill Cleaver. Not the thing that they decided that was good enough, but like, let him have Hill Cleaver and let him be awesome. And the final thing with Saurials, the thing that I like about them and the thing that I would integrate into their whole operation being in Chult is that Saurials offer a quote-unquote good counterpoint to the otherwise dangerous or actively maligned scaled races in the region. Because if we're being honest here, the Yuan-Ti, lizard folk, and all that sort of stuff, like they're all they have bad reputations in the area, and having Saurials is a good counterpoint. Okay, got a question here. Did Dragonbait know anything about the Ring of Winter? Within the context of the Tomb of Annihilation, I imagine that he would know something, or at least be suspicious of something, because it's Artist Kimber's primary weapon, and also the reason why Artist Kimber's been alive for well past his allotted human years. I don't recall anything in the Tomb of Annihilation saying that he knew about it, though. Like, there was nothing specifically written down. And his previous history, as I said, I can't recall the two of them ever being linked before. And so, and I think even in the Tomb of Annihilation, it talks about how, like, they met and Dragonbait agreed to help him try to find his wife. So this is after the spell plague has happened and after Mesro's gone. So yeah, I would say that he may suspect that Artist Kimber has a powerful artifact. Whether he knows the Ring of Winter is in his possession or knows the full scope of its powers, that's a totally different question. If he were to discover that Artist Kimber has it and the level of power that it has, he would probably just let him be, because Artist Kimber, for his problematic uses in the past, is a good aligned character. He was a member of the Harpers for a long time and doesn't do anything actively evil with it. So it'd be one of those things that as a paladin, I think Dragonbait would watch him once he like absolutely knew that he had that power. But aside from that, yeah, he'd probably just let him keep it. So yeah, good question. Really good question. So, coming up to the end of the episode here, if there's any questions left, please type them out. I'll be glad to answer them. In the meantime, I'll talk about the next episode because this is good information. So we're coming up on the end of the series. We're almost done. We're 12 episodes in. We've covered 14 different potential player races in the region alone, which I think is pretty fantastic. And there's only a few left to do. I believe it's Wild Elves, Azer, and maybe one other one. So, yeah, Series 1 is coming to an end. However, it will not be ending next week, and in fact will not be ending until the first last weekend of September and first weekend of October. The reason being, I'm going away to Alberta on a course, and unfortunately I will not have reliable internet or my broadcasting equipment with me for the duration of that time. And so I will not be able to do this for that block. However, when I get back, I will be finishing this off, and the ground will be laid for the next series, which I will be announcing on Twitter next week. So stay tuned to Twitter to find out what exactly the next episode is going to be, and I will see you all at the end of September. So thank you very much for listening. This has been Lore Diver, a POCGamer podcast. If you liked what you heard, please like and subscribe. Follow me on Twitch. Like and subscribe to me on YouTube. And if you want to see more, head over to my blog, POCGamer.com, and check me out on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, where you can find me as POCGamer. If you want to support this podcast, there's links to the Ko-Fi on my blog, and I've got a Patreon going on as well, where the entry tier gets you a cool hex crawl mini map every month. Now, music was provided by purple-planet.com. Thanks again for listening. Have a great day.